We are live. Good day, my crypto friends. It's a pleasure to see you today. Today, I'm bringing to you David Packham. He's been involved with EOS since the very beginning and as a part of the EOS42 block producer who started on the testnet in January when we were first having testnets for EOS, has been a huge mover in the EOS community. You have a financial services background and are advising Warbly, which is going to be launching on EOS. So you're all over the place here, but the purpose of this talk, we're going to get into EOS42 as a block producer candidate. So let's get into that. And David, what do you think sets EOS42 apart from itself as a block producer for EOS?
Hey, well, I think a lot of things actually set us apart. One is that we started off very much as a community originating team. So unlike a lot of the different groups that you tend to see, they all come from the same geographic region, and they're often have been friends previously in life and so on, and they've just decided we're going to become a block producer and we're going to just get as many people together as we know in a city or something like that. Whereas we actually have all met across the EOS community, and we met as a result of starting to work together and finding out the different complementary skill sets that we had to offer. So Charles, for example, I met in December, and on one of the channels, we were both looking to get involved in the earliest testnet before, as it was starting to launch, connected and realized we had a really complementary skill set. And then quite early on, I looked into ways that we could start adding value as a block producer from day one. Even though we were a long way out from launch, and authored the Chintai white paper, because token leasing seemed like a really important value add project that we could do from the start and get kicked off. So we did that, and that's where we then met Liam, who is actually Chinese but based in Canada, because he wanted to translate the paper for us into both Mandarin and Spanish. And that's also when we met Sean Kang, who lives out in Seoul in Korea. So they are the four founding core members of the team. We basically got South African, British, Chinese living in Canada, and Korean. But actually, it made perfect sense, because when you're a block producer, you are servicing a global community. And to service a global community, you need that additional perspective. You need to understand the different ways that EOS is viewed across the community globally. And you, of course, need to be able to communicate with everybody, and ideally in as many time zones as possible. So I think what we're going to see after the launch is that the top BPs that get voted in are rapidly going to expand out into becoming this very diverse organizations that service everybody. And so although they might have a name it maybe is linked to a city, for example, really, everyone's going to be servicing everybody. So that's one thing that makes us different. And then the other is definitely been the first major project we kicked off. Chintai itself is become the first really, really big community project that's been launched, and we've been running it now for 5 months. And the code base is almost complete. We are targeting a first release of token leasing, being completely feeless and funded by block producers. So not just ourselves, but other block producers. So from the start, we've tried to bring in everybody in the community and not just make this about one VP. And yeah, that should be launching sometime in June, depending on how the mainnet goes.
Nice. Can you dig a little bit more into Chintai? Like, tell people exactly what it is. It's going to be so we can lease our EOS to apps or dApps that need the bandwidth. Is that right? And can you tell us a little bit more, dig into that a little bit?
Yeah. So the way the economics of EOS are intended to work is that rather than firstly you are guaranteed minimum bandwidth and CPU for the computational power of the EOS system with your tokens. So what you're able to do therefore is to delegate those out to distributed app creators who are going to need those to run their applications on the system, on the network. So that in the early days may be less important where token price is relatively low, but as the token price starts to go up and up in line with how much utility, how much the system is used, we're going to increasingly start to therefore see app owners needing to lease, because rather than tying up, in theory, hundreds of thousands of dollars in tokens to run their app, they're actually going to need to instead think about it from a different perspective, whereby they can lease for a much smaller price. And of course, as a token holder, that brings you in a potentially steady, continuous stream of income just for holding your tokens. And it's a bit of a no-brainer, because anybody who's planning to vote, they need to stake their tokens and lock them anyway. And at the same time, they can now lease out the bandwidth. And they're still going to be able to get all of the airdrops as well. So that's the sort of basic principle of leasing. But where Chintai is different, and was from the start, is that I saw 2 or 3 different groups starting to mention the idea of launching a leasing business on top of Chintai, and all of them were talking about how much money they could make off the system. And being a BP candidate in the very early days like that, my immediate reaction was, making money off the leasing transactions is like taxing the fundamentals of the economic system within EOS. So it's going to make leasing for small token holders very expensive, because a disproportionate amount of the money is going to be taken up in these transaction fees, and it's going to make it more expensive for the businesses that are actually running on there. So by instead utilizing block rewards from the BP candidates, so including ourselves, we give everybody completely free, feeless token leasing. And that was the vision that we had with the project, and it's been really well received. So yeah, that's, I think, the first big value add that we're going to give back to the community.
Yeah, and that's a huge value add. That's something that has a direct effect on everyone who's holding EOS, which is important. So, and so as far as the economics go, it seems like initially, before there's a ton of dApps that have launched and before the bandwidth is needed, that there probably won't be much of a market for leasing out our tokens in the very beginning stages. It's going to be once there's more demand. Is that how you see it, or do you think there'll be demand right in the beginning?
I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of demand for people to get money and lease them out. So I think what you're going to see is yeah, you're going to see a surplus, a relatively high supply and low demand in the earlier stages. I mean, early on, let's face it, when the mainnet launches, there'll be nothing actually physically running on it. What we're doing is BP's all the detailed additional testing, probably some additional enhancements, software upgrades, etc. So the first major deployment, whatever it may be, might be, for example, Everpedia. And at that point, we're going to have to start seeing the impact on the system at that point. But I think it's one of those things that will snowball. But yeah, it's very tough for anybody to really guess. One of the most common questions on the Chintai Telegram channel is, how much am I going to get for leasing out? And the answer is nobody knows that one. And the market will decide that over time, and it will vary. But also, as a block producer, one of our responsibilities is going to be to watch the token leasing price quite carefully, because if it starts to shoot up, which it would be impacted by things like the token price going up, that would make it prohibitively expensive for businesses to carry out the economics of running on EOS. So that is the sort of time when we as block producers would need to look at actually expanding the bandwidth and network capacity out to bring that down and actually cushion that effect. So it's not going to necessarily just shoot up directly in line with the token price. I think we'll probably see it actually hopefully be a bit more stable, because you don't want leasing prices to ever get too high.
Yeah, if they get too high, then you're disincentivizing the dApps being built, because it's going to cost them so much to use it. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the way everyone needs to look at it is it'll be like a nice dividend, almost a bit like if you have conventional fiat money in a bank account and get a few % a year. It's better than nothing, right? And in one sense, if anything, you could look at it as a complete counterbalance to any inflationary impact that happens from block rewards and the worker proposal fund. It probably will completely offset that.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that, I mean, it's just another part of this self-feeding system, where the inflation feeds the ecosystem so that it grows, but then that's a little bonus that the inflation is even offset. That's really cool. Yeah, and Chintai, you guys are currently, it's in beta, or how far along is it as far as testing goes?
So in terms of where we are right now, the underlying contracts have both been coded. There's 2 underlying contracts relating to that. the pricing engine is also completed, and the API, the private APIs as well. So Steve Floyd of EOS Tribe, which is another BP candidate, stepped in and joined the team and completed the front end user interface side of things. So that's actually completed, all the wireframes, everything there is done. What we've effectively got left to do now is actually connect that up, the back and the front end. And at that point, you'll be able to actually place the orders in rather than doing it through our interface, for example. So we're at a really quite exciting point, because the interface is just about to start being usable, and then we can hit the testing phase, and then we'll roll it out. But of course, early on, it is going to be relatively basic functionality. I've said it elsewhere. It's going to be more akin to Minnow Booster for anybody who's familiar with that on Steam. So rather than it having sophisticated matching of orders, which we talked about in the white paper as being something to add in future functionality, you're going to put your tokens up at a price you determine, and it'll be for the person who wants to fill them on the other end to select maybe 2-3 contracts that fill their requirements, and effectively fill the order. So that's the way it's going to work, at least probably for the first 2 or 3 months, and then thereafter the much more sophisticated pricing engine will kick in and be released around about. We put in nominally September, so we'll see how that goes.
Great. That sounds interesting. And Minnow Booster actually works. I mean, it's a little bit clunky, but it does work as far as, it's going to be a good intermediary. That'll work fine. That's getting it out there so that we can start trying to break it, and then you guys can fix it along the way.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, to some extent, we're all going to benefit from an early interface too, because we'll get feedback from the community once it's there in front of them, and be able to say, well, we like that, we hate this. This doesn't work properly, and it's software, so it's going to be continually upgrading anyway. But where it gets interesting is we hand over the full ownership and governance of Chintai to the community. So this is a community app. Although everyone keeps asking me, are you airdropping tokens, right? That's another favourite. No, we're not, because we don't need to, right? This is being handed over to them, so we need to understand and work through things like the community governance of an app like this. How exactly do the development reflect community and stay accountable? And then there's got to be BP representatives who sponsor and are going to pay for this too. And again, they've got to be accountable to make sure that expenditure and tokens are being used properly. There's lots of logistics when you start to set up a project like this to make sure it all functions and runs properly. And I think, a lot of the other block producers that are kicking off their own projects are kind of entering those sorts of phases now as well, because as you start to get close to something physically rolling out, particularly a community-owned application like this, there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for anyone who's done a startup or launched a DApp or some sort of social media site or something like that, there's a huge difference between getting the idea and getting it all together, and then the actual implementation stage. All of a sudden, a million things that you never would have imagined are there that you have to solve. And it's so you guys are actually very, pretty far along. I mean, you guys have done a massive amount of work, and being a block producer, EOS42, being a block producer is a massive project on its own, but you've taken also on this huge community project, which is an interesting point, and something that I'm finding as I do a lot of these interviews is there's some of these block producers like EOS42, and you mentioned Steve Floyd at EOS Tribe, and who is working on Chintai also, who are doing a lot of basically the grunt work, because there's a lot of this actual work that goes into launching this, opposed from just bouncing ideas. So that's something for everyone to know, that EOS42 is doing a lot of the grunt work as far as these projects that we're all going to use. And that's one of the big things I look for in block producers is the work that's getting done. What other projects, EOS42? I mean, that's a lot, but is there any other things that are going on with EOS42 that you guys are working on?
Yeah, I mean, the big things we're working on otherwise right now is everything related to the launch. So, I mean, for example, EOS Cafe are starting to review a lot of the Ricardian contracts, and we're in fact just tonight have kicked off a discussion which I'm involved with EOS New York to effectively set aside a public GitHub, so that when the code base moves from BlockRON, that we have a proper community-owned GitHub that's got neutral admins for it from across the world, and that is set up properly. Because at the moment there's a big assumption that it's going to get done, but then everybody steps back and realizes no one's really sure who's doing these things, and it's largely falling this sort of stuff on the block producers, and certain ones are very kind of involved with a bit of everything, and that's another example of the sort of thing there that we've been involved with. But otherwise, on the technical side, we also, apart from trying to give some support where we could to the boot BIOS side that's been led by EOS Canada, the Ghostbusters initiative that kicked off by both Rio and Hong Kong, we've got quite heavily involved with that in the last couple of weeks too, to try and ensure that there's a really secure launch. There's a lot of very technical aspects that are being considered by some genuinely brilliant people globally, and we're trying to make sure that we can add as much value as possible. Charles Holtzkamp he's the effective CTO, if you like, of EOS42, and he is incredibly talented at what he does. I mean, he led all of the DDoS advanced testing, and we actually threw out DDoS testing over the last month for free to as many BP candidates as wanted, to actually ensure that everybody's got as robust a solution as possible. Because actually, it makes complete sense if you think about it. There's no point using a DDoS solution that's not going to work properly, because the network will be weakened by that. So there's all sorts of things there. And then beyond that, in terms of the launch, we're launching an incubator fund actually. So we were looking at what is the most effective way to utilize these the block rewards to actually add value back into the ecosystem. And my background is asset management anyway, so I'm used to looking at ways to actually reinvest things back that add value in a virtuous circle. And incubator is the ultimate way to do that for EOS, which is why I think a number of others are also doing that. In fact, Block One is setting up an incubator fund as well, which tells you that it is clearly something they think adds value as well, because by actually assisting businesses with the move on to EOS, and that could be businesses that don't utilize blockchain at all. It could be giving them development resources to help them actually build prototypes out. It could be utilizing our token reserves to stake them, to enable them to move very cheaply or even free onto EOS for a certain period of time to get up and started. That's going to add massive value to the utility of the EOS token. And of course, that feeds back into increasing the value for everybody. So it's a win-win. So that's one of the big projects we're going to be doing. Another is third world blockchain education. So it's something that I'm particularly close to. There's somebody I know in London who actually runs a third world blockchain education charity, and we're pledging a small proportion of our net profits that we would have otherwise taken to that, to help fund and support that, because it's just something that we very much like to do, and all of the founding members are big believers in that.
Yeah, that's great. Because we think about all these ways that blockchain is going to change the world or change culture or help, decentralize things. But there's also this aspect where for it to work in some third world places, they need to know about it and how to implement it. And so that's a great take right there. I like that.
Yeah, so I almost feel like that combination actually of the incubator fund and the third world blockchain education may end up becoming complementary. So it may be that we end up being able to channel that to actually bring on board some very talented people in disadvantaged areas, and actually be able to bring them into the EOS ecosystem through a combination of both the educational side and the incubator fund side. So I'm hopeful that will end up marrying the two concepts together into something that really adds value for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. The incubator program is going to be huge, because that's something where there's so many ideas and so many people trying to start up dApps for EOS. Just any help that they can get, and a lot of these projects are looking to block producers as kind of a guide. So that will really help grow the community. You mentioned the Ghostbusters project, and security of the chain and the recent there's been some recent bugs that were fixed. Can you get into that a little bit and how you guys are involved and how the chain looks as far as the strength of the launch?
Yeah, so Ghostbusters itself, I think, started out as a more of a kind of security review, is my understanding, but it's developed out into a much more advanced offering that, in theory, now could be one of the central, if not the central, solution we use for launching the chain. I think the direction this is now moving is that we're going to utilize EOS Canada's boot BIOS for one aspect of the launch, and then the rest of the structure will probably take place through the Ghostbusters side of things. And in terms of that, we should end up with a highly secure method that fully carries out the detailed validation testing, for example, that needs to be carried out. So because it's not just as simple as booting up the chain and then saying to the token holders, here you go, here's a chain. Not only does we need to have things like the token snapshot completely validated. Everybody needs to be able to do that. Externals need to be able to do that. Everyone needs to be able to say, yeah, this actually honors the Constitution and the token snapshot. But beyond that, there's functionality inherent in a blockchain in EOS that actually we need to test out. It can be everything from does the voting work to do paying BP's block rewards. Does that actually work? There's it can be a range of quite fundamental functionality that were it not to work, you'd present the chain to be validated, people would vote, and the entire thing would fall over because it wasn't a fully functional chain. So once it's up and running and everything's tested, everything will be fine. So that's why, that was something else that I had to get involved in, was the coordination of that recent statement that all of the block producers put out. So in fact, a big chunk of the last 2 days was spent on helping draft that up and make sure we got the wording as accurately as we could, which was to set expectations and transparency in the community to make sure everybody understood that these are the different steps and stages that we're going through. These are the reasons why, and that the timeline it's not likely to just be hours as some people might expect. But don't worry, these are the reasons why it's going to be approximately this amount of time. So I think we have a real service right now to do to the community, which is to make sure everybody understands what we're working on. We're taking it highly seriously to make sure it's done right, and therefore everything's going to be proceeding in an effective way.
Yeah, and that messaging is important because the FUD on Twitter and Reddit takes off so quick, and so to set that expectation that, hey, we're not just flicking on a light switch here and turning EOS on. This is there is a set line of things that have to happen, and it could take a bit of time, and the tokens are going to be locked for a little while. So setting that expectation is a good idea. What do you think on kind of a longer end a timeline might look like for getting this launched correctly, or what are those estimations on the short and the long end?
So I think on the short end, you're probably looking at absolute minimum about 3 days from end to end, from the snapshot through to launch. That's assuming that we get the chains validated and then select a single one and there's no problems with anything. In theory, if we were to find in the validation side that some core functionality just wasn't working and a reboot from the start was the only solution, we'd have to go back, and that might set us back as much as sort of a day or two. Now, in theory, that could happen multiple times. It hasn't happened before, but nonetheless, anything in theory is possible, right? So that's why no one wants to set an exact timeline that we're held to just on the basis that we can't be absolutely certain of how things will pan out. But realistically, we're looking at probably about 3 to 4 days, I would say.
Yeah, and that's absolutely an important expectation that you guys are setting there, because that catching people by surprise would cause them to, have come up with all kinds of reasons it happened, when in reality,
well, they would, right? Yeah,
yeah, everyone knows.
Given that, no, absolutely. If you remember that famous disclaimer in the Block One token sale thing. There's no guarantees a blockchain is going to be launched, etc., etc. Of course, what we're all seeing with this amazing cooperation now globally between effective rivals. It was Thomas Cox made a great tweet, I think, today about this. It's the fact that we've got a collective shared interest to get the blockchain launched. Everyone has.
Yeah.
So there is no doubt that a mainnet is about to launch, because everybody has got a vested stake and interest in wanting to make this happen. So, no one's got anything to worry about there. The only thing is just the exact timing down to, the hour, etc., that we can't be absolutely sure of yet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I did see that Thomas Cox tweet with him. He was reading his reading the book and yeah.
Yeah, the Schelling book, wasn't it? Yeah, and it was good.
Yeah, quality. Good. Well, that's good to set that expectation, and I'll try to do that within my circles as well, because I think that is really important to get that information out there. And then, as far as the other thing I just wanted to touch on again was, you mentioned kind of in passing, the GitHub repository is going to go from block one to the community. And basically that's just block one handing over the keys to GitHub to everyone else. Is that right? And so you guys are making sure that's handed over correctly, or who's going to have access to that?
Well, we're physically going to set up the GitHub. It's not so much who has access to it in the sense that anybody can obviously view it. It's who runs it, who are the admins for that. So it can't be block producers, right? We're not in it. We can't be deemed impartial enough to hold on to the code base. So I remember we had a discussion about this in I think it was the governance channel, might have been Block Pros. And my first suggestion to everybody was NS James and Cesar Rodriguez. They've been two of the most prominent high-quality coders in the EOS community since the earliest days I can remember. And they both said that they're absolutely fine with that. But of course, it's got to be a global repository. So now what we're doing is also making sure that some of the more prominent BP candidates in Asia are now going out and ensuring we find some additional representation from other regions of the world. So we're probably going to have about 6 admins. But the repository is getting set up tonight so that we can get that ready. So and then we'll be in a good position there, because everyone can know what the shared common EOS repository will actually be, and obviously Block One can step back a little bit away from this further as they're trying to.
Yeah. All right. That makes a lot of sense. That's just a good example of one of these small initiatives that is really important that someone needs to step up and do. So again,
all this stuff is going on in the background all the time, and I think it's a good illustration actually. If anybody in the token holder community, maybe is questioning whether or not block producers, have vested interests with themselves, they probably just need to take a look at the amount of work that the BP candidates are doing. Because if there's ever a great example of the elegance of the DPoS system, it's that incredible alignment of interests between us adding value to token holders in order to earn their votes in a continuous cycle. And it's a powerful system that works incredibly well, I think, and I love seeing it work. So it's just going to be really interesting, I think. I mean, the most exciting thing of all is going to be that moment we get the mainnet up and launched, and everyone goes off and votes, and we'll finally get to see from this 180 candidates, there's probably going to be a small subset, maybe a third, that actually end up being block producers or standby nodes. So it will just be a fascinating thing seeing how that all pans out, because it's very hard for anybody to judge, I think, and be sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, that is going to be an impressive moment. And I like what you said about how beautiful DPoS is working, and how it's, each time you see these things working out, it just gives more credibility that maybe this is actually something that is better than, threat of violence, as far as getting people to do things and act certain ways. This could be in big picture, it's such a shift. It is beautiful to see these little parts work out with these correct incentives, and DPoS is really a cool killer thing going on here. So
I think it's an amazing system to see working. And now everyone focuses then on the potential for it to not work. They start to talk about, what if a block producer is compromised and becomes a bad actor, et cetera, et cetera. But you'd have to have one hell of an incentive, because the financial rewards for the privilege of being a block producer are substantial. Mm-hmm. And that's also baked into the system to enable you to have a huge opportunity cost for misbehavior. And I think, you know, people probably don't tend to fully consider that when they start talking about bad actors, because from what I can see, even in regions of the world where there's some concerns relating to, you know, ownership. So EOS42, for example, we're completely self-funded, and we've been working on this full-time since February. So we put a lot in, and whatever happens, it's been, you know, best 6 months of my life. So even if it's not been financially the best 6 months of my life, but you know, but we're able to say to the community, financially independent, self-funded. But of course, there are a lot of big businesses that have either got other sections to their business, or they have got minority stakes. And you know, there's some inherent suspicion amongst the community with people like that. But actually, if you look at the way they're behaving, their interests couldn't be more aligned with the community again. You know, they're doing sterling work running their local communities, well, just as we run EOS London and all of the meetups there. They're doing that kind of thing. They've got projects on the go that are adding value. So again, it's an interesting one if you then look at it to actually assess bad actor potential versus actually the incentives to behave. Certainly at the moment, the system's working perfectly from what I can see.
Yeah, yeah. It seems to be so far working, and I guess sometimes I like to think maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, once people maybe forget how important the block producer role is, and maybe voting becomes. Right now, voting seems so paramount to everything we're doing, and voting for the right block producers. I wonder how that kind of shifts out over time. That'll be interesting to see. But hopefully these incentives are correctly. So
completely, yeah. I mean, I actually was talking in one of the block producer channels just earlier today, and actually I said the biggest risk for the community is indifference and complacency. That was for me my view on one of the biggest risks we have, which is that. And actually, it wasn't in the context so much of block producers. It was things like governance and oversight of all the processes. The community has to stay diligent and vigilant. It has to keep a close eye on things, and that it needs to ensure that it remains active in all forms. So it's going to require people who are not block producers but are token holders, maybe with quite a vested stake or not, but are passionate about the project and wanting to make it better for everybody, to step up now and start to fill some governance roles as we start to add that internal structure as a community. And I hope they do. You know, we've seen some on the like Sam. Oh, I wouldn't even like to pronounce his surname. I think it's something like Sam Powoski. He's been highly vocal on the governance channel for at least the last 6 to 8 months. Incredibly smart, and has added a huge amount there. And there's a couple of others like him that have been around in the community, but really we need far more than just the likes of the two of them. We need you know, tens more people to start stepping up and getting involved.
And I think that from what I've seen with Steam, it just seems like a good mirror to what we're dealing with EOS and Steam. It over time, over the last couple of years, you've seen just random community members step up and create initiatives and stop kind of bad actors. And it's kind of this anti-fragile community where people will step up in their own self-interest, but it benefits the chain. So hopefully that's able to, you know, years down the road sustain itself. That'll be one of the most interesting. And I think that you're right. Complacency is one of the biggest questions out there, and keeping people involved is one of the biggest questions. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder whether this worker proposal fund, I mean, if we look at it, it's 4 times the size of the entire block producer reward pool, and it has no actual defined purpose. So that is a massive empowerment for the community to actually access funds if there's consensus agreement from others to access and run projects. And you know, it could be from the most extreme side of let's burn 4% of tokens annually, to, you know, you could divert the entire lot to charity if you so saw fit, to kicking off essential infrastructure projects. You know, you could put in place all sorts of oversight projects in terms of keeping an eye on different actors. you name it almost. And it's going to be a fascinating one because it's going to be the imagination of the community as well here that actually starts to tap in here to this. It's going to be as much a creativity pool as a worker proposal fund, I think, and we shall see some very interesting ideas being proposed.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like the idea of some of those EOS worker proposals spilling over into the physical world, like some infrastructure actually being built, somehow integrating that. It'll be really interesting to see how creative people get with that. One thing's for sure is when there's money up for grabs, people are supremely creative. So we're going to see some great worker proposals. And Thomas Cox mentioned one of the first worker proposals. Him and I were talking about was they're going to have a worker proposal to basically have an auditing a group of auditors to make sure that these worker proposals are being followed up on. So one of the common questions.
That's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
I think my first ever reaction when I heard about the worker proposal fund and how big it was going to be was because originally it was potentially going to be the other way around, and I was thinking, wow, that's so much money going to block producers. It's a huge responsibility to actually to create projects. And do all sorts of things, which I found personally exciting because I thought, great, there's so many things I can do here. I'm doing Chintai now, but imagine all these other things I could do, I was starting to think. But of course, I instantly realized that's fine. It's actually better this way around because there's nothing to stop me as a block producer coming up with a really valid project and idea and proposing it as a worker proposal fund. We might as well, as a block producer, then, additionally fund aspects of it. But there's absolutely nothing to stop anybody making worker proposal funds, and I like it better because it now means that the control lies fully in the hands of the community. And my only ever big comment on it was it needs such careful oversight because you could see it turning into fraudulent activity otherwise. You could see it becoming this sort of comfortable situation of money being paid out regularly for some sort of service that actually doesn't really exist or doesn't add any value and is actually really siphoning off tokens to line someone's pocket, and that's exactly the sort of thing. So I'm glad to hear that that's top of Thomas's priority list because I think that's very important with the amount of money we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's so much incentive for everyone. People are going to be looking for fraudulent activity or anything that's just not because everyone wants to be a part of the EOS. We're all incentivized for things to go right. So. Yeah, that I think that'll be really cool to see when the worker proposals start. Will those worker proposal funds be available once the first block is officially mined? Once this kind of goes live? Yeah,
my understanding is in the same way that inflation is going to start being awarded on an ongoing basis. So the worker proposal fund just starts building up in a trickle. It averages out at 4% annually. Fixed, unless the community votes to change that. It might decide that's too high. It might decide actually let's reduce it to 2.5%. Right? So it's really going to be very, very difficult to know for sure how the community reacts. But the smart thing to do would be, of course, to leave it and at least give it a couple of years to see how effectively the system works as is, and then we'll be able to make some informed judgments as to whether or not any changes should be made. But yeah, that should start building up instantly. So it'll obviously be quite small early on, which is fine because we're going to have that early period of bedding in anyway, and several months are likely to pass. And we need to get the structure around the utilization of worker proposals. We need to have a means of actually proposing them and ensuring that we don't just have there's actually substance behind them. So that I think the way I've seen this kind of thing being talked about is that people put down a small EOS stake themselves, and if it is actually deemed to be a valid proposal, even if it's not accepted, you get your stake back. But if it's a completely what's the word for it? If it's a completely frivolous proposal that is just absolutely got no merit whatsoever, you might lose your stake as a means of actually ensuring you only propose things that can be deemed serious and credible. And that's more to just stop you being spammed up with thousands of potentially random requests like, we want to rename the core repository Boaty McBoatface, all the good stuff. Have if people decide they want to propose something for a joke or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You always need to do the spam prevention. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And did you guys have any? Did EOS42? I think that did you have some involvement with the voting portal as well, or is that something you guys are involved with?
Not so much actually. I mean, I've actually finally been pulled across into the inner coding team of it, but my involvement's been minimal with it. I mean, I was in some of the earliest emails discussing it, and was giving some structure, as I often do as my background in project management, saying, we need to do this, this, and this, and this. And I finally followed up because I hadn't heard much for a while and discovered the whole project had kicked off and they had a whole Telegram group going on. So they're in great shape actually now. They've obviously been on the back foot somewhat, but classic community as it is. In the meantime, Liberty Block, who are Puerto Rico-based BP that more recently announced but got an incredibly strong team. I think Everpedia, one of the co-founders, is part of that one. But they've actually launched a fully functioning, working voting portal that integrates with Scatter, which is good news because it just takes a little bit of pressure off everyone being dependent on the one portal. The voting portal, though, however, when it launches, and I believe it's due to go up today, if it's not, then it'll be tomorrow, has much more sophisticated functionality, and the interface is great. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it go live, because I think that will probably become the go-to place that I think most people will choose to put their voting through.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's really, really interesting, really coming up on us quick here. I can't wait till next week, and you're
right about that.
We're right, right in the middle of it.
It's the classic coming up on us quick, where all these ideas or things people have been talking about over the last few months, people have suddenly gone, oh yeah, we haven't done that yet. Oh, actually, who's working on that? Oh, none of us are working on that yet. So there's been this sudden stampede towards all these certain essential projects to get them done, because everyone suddenly realized we probably could have started this a little while ago, have we really realized? But it always goes back to it, and this is why the worker proposal fund will be good when it goes live, because at that point it becomes very clear who's doing what, and of course there's a financial incentive too, and it becomes the responsibility from a job perspective. Right now, these are volunteers doing all this, literally doing this with their own time and giving it up huge amounts of it just to get this done, because they believe in EOS. And I think that's the most inspiring thing for me. Has been 6 months or more now of watching people who are here because they want to change the world and do something for the right reasons. I'm loving it. I said to a few people like Kev from EOS Go, I said, we're probably going to look back on these heady days pre-launch in a couple of years' time, and we're going to miss it, because the community by then might be 10 times the size. And it'll change inherently with that, but these are amazing times,
Yeah, absolutely. These the tougher times are, during them are rough, but they're the ones you always look back on and think, man, those are the glory days, and that's what that book by Sebastian Junger, Tribe, is all about. Is about humans thriving and getting their most fulfillment out of interaction in some tough situations with other humans. I mean, that's kind of in our DNA, is to appreciate, or to, we're built to work on things like this. And what I love about it, like that you said also, is that bigger picture, we're working on something that could have a huge impact on the world, which has been hard to do in the past. If you want to have a positive impact on the world, it's hard to gain a lot of reach. Maybe you can go out and affect a few hundred people individually and make the world a better place. But with EOS, there's this feeling that maybe we can actually make the entire world different going forward. And that's, it's a powerful thing. And these, like you said, these are cool times. These are times that we'll look back on and really appreciate. So it's going to be rad.
Totally. Yeah. I've been loving it.
Yeah. And you're coming to San Francisco coming up here, right? Are you going to make it out for the Tulip Conference?
I am indeed. Yeah. No, I can't wait. It's the Tulip is one of the most exciting looking conferences I've seen in a long time, because it's merging a combination of emerging technologies and all aspects relating to blockchain governance. It's looking at all the future technologies as well and how they're going to be applied. And some of the speaker list, it just looks too good not to. And then they've combined it with a block producer summit, a global block producer summit. So that's going to be fascinating for me, because I'm going to finally meet a huge number of people I've been talking to for the last 6 months in person for the first time. So yeah, that's going to be good. There's going to be some really good speeches from the likes of Luke Stokes, who's a STEAM witness and is involved as well with EOS DAC, which is the first big distributed, autonomous company that's actually also a block producer candidate. And I think Ash Oro is also coming out and going to be giving a speech as well on the economics related to BPs as well. And I think as well, I've been asked to be on one of the panels too. So might be even be governance as well. And I'm not sure who else is on it yet, but it sounds like there's so many individual candidates coming, including a load from Asia, that it's going to be a great meeting.
Yeah, and I know that Thomas Cox, I think he'll be there. I'm not sure if he's speaking or not, but I think he'll be there. NS James, NS James will be there. So, yeah, if you're interested in EOS, like, this is the spot to be. This is where everyone's finally going to come together and all, like, see each other in person finally. It's gonna be great. Plus, I like how they went into the kind of the emerging tech in general and governance, and how this a little bit bigger picture than just another token conference or something like that. The emerging technologies is bigger picture. So yeah, Tulip Conference is going to be fun. I think it's June 5th through 9th. I think it starts 5th and 7th is the conference, and through the 9th is workshops. So
that's right. Yeah,
that'll be cool. I'll put a link for that below. Where can people find you, or what's the best way to? I'll put your website, EOS42. Oh, and while we're at it, what's EOS42 mean before we start wrapping it up here? I think that might be that's a fun question.
Yeah, actually, that was Charles. We were originally debating whether to call ourselves EOS London, because we ran the EOS London community, and we just started talking about the global role of block producers, and decided no, we should have a name that actually isn't. And he just suggested it because of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So 42 is the meaning of life, and the logic is that, well, if EOS is the question, then we finally merged them together, EOS42.
Oh, that's brilliant.
We were just having some fun with that, and that was where we originally decided to call it. I know makes no real sense, right? But on the other hand, it's distinctive. So there you go.
It's wonderful. I mean, it's the meaning of life, and EOS is. We finally know the question. That's brilliant. I like it.
The question and the answer all in one, right? There we go.
That's beautiful. Cool name. All right. Well, was there any things that we kind of glossed over? Any big points? I know you run one of the biggest EOS meetups in London. That's cool. Was there anything that we kind of missed, or that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up for the people here?
I don't think so, and I think everybody should who is a token holder should take some time to probably spend some time looking at channels like yourself, because they really it's going to be trying to get some informed commentary from others involved in the community that's going to help inform everyone else. Mm-hmm. It's going to be very challenging to look through 180 odd entries on the BP portal and try and from that assess who you think are worth voting for. But on the other hand, we need 15% of token holders to vote before the mainnet gets validated and goes live. So there's a kind of there's a double side to these things. But I really do hope that people consider us and look at the value add that we've given to the community to date. It's pretty much a dream come true for the whole team that if we do become a BP, and I very much hope we do. But if not, we will continue. In fact, somebody asked me that. They said, well, what will happen if you don't make it as a BP? And I said, well, we'll hopefully then be a backup node, and we'll fight and earn our way up to the top. 21. That's how it would work for us. So it's a perpetual election that never stops. And otherwise, we're EOS40 at EOS42 on Telegram as well, or at EOS London as well, which is our main meetup and community site. But yeah, No, thanks very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'll link at EOS42 and yeah, EOS London. I'll link your website and we'll get you going there. And just on a summary note here, my crypto friends, I've been looking into these VPs a lot, and the ones that I have on the show and that we talk to is because I've been really involved in the EOS communities and all the different Telegram chats, and there's some VPs specifically that I see doing a ton of the grunt work, a ton of the actual work that's going in, getting this built for all of us. So that's why EOS42 is here, and you heard that they're big projects. Chintai is a huge project, and then everything else they're involved in. So choose your votes carefully there, my crypto friends. It was a pleasure to meet you, David, and I can't wait to see you at the Tulip Conference, and best of luck to you in EOS42. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is just